Good evening. This is Colleen again from the Sherburne Public Library. This is part 2 in our series of book talk. I have with me again Brian McDowell from Log Cabin Books and Mike Tefft, who is a local author. Tonight we're going to talk about the writing process. I think every writer has a different kind of process, or they do things in their own way. And so we thought we would discuss a little bit of that. We'll get Mike's view on that and Brian's view and who knows what else. So I'll start it off, Michael, with what motivates you or inspired you to write in the first place? Where did that come from?
I've always had a desire to write and tell stories. It wasn't something I actually did a lot of work on for a long time, but it's something I've always liked to do. In college, my one activity in college was writing for the college humor magazine. So I've always, I guess, had a love of writing. And it wasn't until probably about 7 years ago that I really got semi-serious about it.
Right, yeah. Did you ever have a role model or somebody that you looked up to, or maybe a favorite author or someone you admire in that?
Yeah, there's lots of authors I admire. I think probably overall I would say probably Kurt Vonnegut. He's written one of my favorite books.
Good choice, I think.
I'm not sure. I don't really have a role model. I would have to say just the sort of rags to riches story of J.K. Rowling. I mean, just the fact that, she'd written that book and shopped it around, many publishers before somebody took a chance on it. And, now she's one of the richest people in the world.
Right.
And Mike, I think she's a great example of what you closed the last session with, which was a wonderful quote, and that was somebody who writes the book that she wants to read. And I think that has a lot to do with her success and with the success of people like you who have an idea in their head that nobody else has in their heads exactly the same way, and they're able to write because of that. So I think that kind of inspiration is really important.
Absolutely.
She's done pretty well, JK.
Yeah, she's done all right. I think we touched on this a little last time too, but where do you come up with your story ideas, or maybe where did this story come up? Maybe you want to just recap a little on that from last time.
The original idea for the story started, like I think I said last week, with Star Trek, as all things do. I don't know if you can see, I have my Starfleet Academy engineering branch sweatshirt on tonight.
The red letters that gave it away.
At least it's not a red shirt. So
yes,
that's right.
It came about. It was the second of the new Star Trek movies, and it had just come out in the spring. And I started thinking, Scotty's always been my favorite character. I was like, what if Scotty was the captain of the Enterprise instead of Kirk? And then as that sort of mulled around in my head a little bit, I said, well, I can't really write that, but I could do something similar. And then I came up with the whole, well, an airship is similar to a starship. And that sort of led me down the steampunk route. And then doing a little research, I was able to tie it in with some things. And I, at the time, had I still do, the 3-story arc for this whole story. So it came from that. Other times, I've had a couple different story ideas come to me from just things I've seen. For a little while, I was noodling around with writing some horror short stories, and we had been to the Utica Library for their Fandemicon, and we were down in the basement, and there was a sign on one of the doors that said, "Keep locked at all times." And I was thinking, what would you keep locked at all times in a library? You know, so that,
Well,
yeah. And another idea I got came, I was driving down the road, and all of a sudden, sitting by the side of the road, not necessarily near a house, was one of those big old console TVs from like the 70s. You know, big wooden piece of furniture with a television in it, and it was just sitting there. So that sort of made me think, well, what would that be doing out there? So, I mean, they can come from a lot of different places. So, I mean, like I said, sometimes it's things I see, and if I'm smart, I write it down, and so I keep that image. In fact, that television, I actually pulled over and took a picture of it with my camera, so that I had it.
Mike, I have a question for you because I get a different answer from every author I ask this of. How is the process different in your second and third book than it was in your first? And is it shorter or longer, or is that just a random thing?
that's a good question. Yeah.
Well, I had tried to make more of an effort to change things up this time around. I'm trying to be more organized and more of a plotter. So if you remember, for those who didn't see last episodes, there's kind of two opposing schools of thought for how people write. There are the plotters. They're the people who outline absolutely everything. They know exactly what they're going to write when they sit down. It's, okay, I'm doing scene 3. Okay, all right, I got scene 3. Scene 3 does this, and this. Okay, now I got to just kind of write it. Then the other extreme are what are called pantsers, who write by the seat of their pants, or a more dignified name is they write into the dark. Dean Wesley Smith, who's a very prolific author, prefers the write into the dark. But basically, you write and you don't know where you're going, and you just keep writing till you get the story. I kind of fall in between. I do have I've always had a rough outline, so like the big story points are done, but not always how to get from point A to point B to C to D isn't always clearly mapped out for me. This time around, I'm trying to be a little more organized and a little more on the plotter side. I'm not sure it's helping, but because I'm not seeming to get a lot of writing done right now. But I don't know. I think in some ways it's taking me longer in these subsequent books because I'm second guessing myself more. The first time around, I didn't know what I didn't know, so I just plunged in blindly, and now I'm second guessing myself more.
Let me ask you this, Mike. Do you think the periods when you're unable to write, or perhaps able to write less than other times, is it because you have something mapped out and you just can't link it, like you said, from A to B to C, or is it that you didn't map it out, so you're wondering where these characters are headed?
I'm not sure. I think recently it's been dissatisfaction with the plot that I had worked out, and I was having problems connecting what I intellectually thought I wanted to write with like what I really felt and how I felt the story was going. And so I kind of felt like I was at odds with myself, because I'd be trying to say, well, this is what I put in my outline, so this is what I've got to write. And I think that is some of the issue lately. So, but I'm planning. I think I'm getting past that. I think I've got past the initial problem, and now I think I can pretty quickly dive into the part of the story I've been dying to tell. I mean, in talking about process too, some people are really good at, they can write whatever scene they want in whatever order they want. That is not me. I have to I have to go linearly. I think it's because I'm a programmer, and I think that way. So it's got to go from, I have to go linearly. I can't say, well, I know how this is end. I'm going to write the ending scene. No, I've got to get there. And usually the scenes that I know what I'm going to do, those are sort of my reward scenes, since I know, I can't wait to write this scene. Okay, well, you have to wait. It's like you can't have dessert till you eat your vegetables.
That's an interesting comment. I think of the authors I've spoken with and worked with, and the ones I've read about. And by the way, I'll make a shameless plug, although I get nothing out of it, for Stephen King's book called On Writing. A lot of people think of Stephen King just as a horror novelist and an author of scary stories, but you have to remember he basically is responsible for Stand By Me and Shawshank Redemption and a bunch of stories that were decidedly not terrifying.
Yes.
But he talks a lot in that book about process and about making sure you're true to your characters so they don't all sound the same, which is a very common rookie mistake. And the other thing is, if you think of a movie that you've seen that got bad reviews, or a TV series that got bad reviews because characters started doing things that were not really part of them, and the fans would say that he would never do that, she would never do that. Quite often, that's because the writer had mapped out the story first and used some really crude machinations to get through the plot, including making characters act like people that they weren't. The classic example of, well, in this case, it combines plot writing or formulaic plot writing and staying too long, is Fonzie jumping the shark. Now, a lot of people know the phrase "jump the shark," but what they don't know is toward the end of the Happy Days phenomenon, which went on for it seemed like 20 years, they were running out of ideas, and they had a whole cast at some beach. I forget. I think it was California, and Fonzie was water skiing, and a shark was nearby, and he actually jumped over the shark, and it was such a ridiculous scene that it took on the meaning of the universal kind of meaning of, this is what happens when you go too far and sacrifice the quality and the integrity of your characters for the story when you don't have a story. So you often see bad writing done because people over outlined their story and then didn't have any idea how people in their story were going to get where they needed to be to fulfill the outline. So I kind of like your way better, where you kind of maybe wander a little bit, but mostly you listen to the characters, and finally when they come to you with what they're supposed to be doing, it's obvious and you can write it down. And that's awesome. But On Writing, which is now an audiobook, if you want to know how to write well, that's certainly one way. There are a lot of community colleges and local colleges that have great courses in writing. One of my authors who wrote Going Up the Country, which we talked about last time, a novel, went to a course like that and learned how to write characters and write voices and that kind of thing. So, but it certainly is a process, and I'm glad to hear that you're outlining more than you were, but it's also good that you're still being true to what the characters are telling you, because that's kind of cool.
Do you, some authors that I have seen talk about their process say that the character basically writes the book for them, that character talks to them and speaks to them in varying ways. Some people, I think they think literally as the person is talking to them, but
that's a little scary.
Yeah, it seems a little odd, but I'm sure you can hear the character's voice when you're writing and thinking about what you're doing. I mean, do you think that what are your thoughts on something like that? Do you feel that kind of a thing, or I don't know?
Yeah, I definitely do, and you kind of feel it on those days where when you're writing, you cannot get the words out of your fingertips fast enough. They don't come nearly often enough, but when they do, that kind of makes everything worth it, where you just, like, it is just flying out and you cannot, well, I'm not the world's greatest typer anyways, but you just can't type fast enough to get the words out of your fingertips.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that is when the characters are really speaking to you and you're really, connected to it. But yeah, I do sometimes in the back of my head hear my characters kind of berating me like, hey, when are you going to get this story? When are you going to finish this story here?
Let me ask you this, Mike. When does an author know that he's done?
I don't know if you ever know when you're done. Well, I mean, you can kind of tell, well, like I said, since I outlined the story a little bit, I can kind of tell, okay, I've written everything down, but, that doesn't mean it's done. Usually what it means is I keep going through it. I go through it 2 or 3 times or more. I have other people look at it, and I kind of think it's done when I get to the point that I can't stand looking at it anymore.
Love it.
And that's when I will go and have somebody do the actual line editing to finish it up, and then I'll go through it one more time after that. And at that point it's like, okay, I think I've done what I can. Although, you get done and then you go, geez, I wish I'd done that, or I wish I did this different, or
I think that's true of every. That's true of every art form. I mean,
That's true.
Directing a theater show for myself, I'm always later looking at it going, oh, why didn't I do that? Or, you never feel like you're really finished, I think. I mean, you get to a level where you accept it and this is it, but then there's always things that you wish you could do differently or redo. So,
that's interesting.
I do think you can revise too much.
Yeah.
And this doesn't come from fiction, but this is an anecdote that happened to me. So when I was in college, I went to an engineering college, predominantly engineering college, and I got asked to be a writing lab tutor at the start of my sophomore year. So I went to the writing lab tutor training, and they tell you about outlining and doing all of this stuff. And so I had my first paper come up in one of my classes. So I was like, okay, I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm going to do this exactly the way we're doing it. And I did it. I revised it several times. And I got a okay grade. I got a good grade, but it wasn't a great grade on it. So the next paper came around and I was a lot busier, and it was one of those, infamous, okay, the paper's due tomorrow, time to write the essay tonight. And I used my usual approach where, at least on those, if I can get the first sentence in that first paragraph, the rest of it's virtually done. And that's just the way it works for me. I realize I'm weird like that. But once I did that, I got like an A+ on that paper versus the sort of the B-ish I got on the paper that I did the right way with lots of revision and lots of, So I do think you can revise the life out of things.
Yeah, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
And I've had authors who wanted to put out a second edition and a third edition and a fourth edition based on nothing more, not adding anything to the book except for rewriting things that they wished sounded different. And, as a musician, and I know you guys are too, it's that feeling that nobody stops in the middle of an improv and says, could I do that last 4.5 bars over again? It's not the way it works. Not that writing is improv, but at some point you have to say, this is what you get. This is what I've got. This is what I'm giving to you. So that's interesting.
Of course, music has the luxury of it is sort of the moment. So once it's happened, you can't go back and revise.
Right. But a lot would if they could. I think some would drop in 4 bars in a channel if they could to change a record. Yeah. And I've had authors and I've said to them, that's not a second edition. That's that's not worthy of adding a second edition to it, because all the people who may buy it are going to say, wow, this must be different than the one I bought, and you're going to be perpetrating fraud for 16 sentences that you rewrote. So that's difficult. Mike, you haven't had much experience with this, but one of the things I like to tell authors is when they come to me with a manuscript that they think is done, they're actually only just beginning the process. And I know you've had people who've read your stuff. Did you ever get a feeling from somebody that they didn't think it was as done as you did, or they wanted to know more about X or Y that you didn't include?
Not so much. I usually don't have the problem of not including enough. That's not usually my problem. But I will, like on the last one, I will say I had a subplot in that I kind of put it in because I wanted to introduce something that I might use in a separate series down the road.
Mhm.
And I didn't. I think I knew it wasn't right, but I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. I don't, maybe I'm. And someone read it, and they pointed out exactly what I already knew, that I had to rewrite that part because it wasn't. It was disjointed from the story, and I found a way to do a similar thing without disrupting my plot, and I still have seeds I still do have the seeds if I want to make this one of the characters in my second book. He's a secondary character, but I'm thinking of turning him into a series.
Oh.
That's cool.
Just to remind the readers, Mike's series is the Reluctant series.
Yes.
And I highly recommend it. It's good writing. It's really interesting storytelling. And it could only come from the mind of Mike. And I mean that as a compliment.
Absolutely.
And my message to authors is, don't get tied up with writing the way you think people want you to write. Write the way you want to write, because there's no one else out there who can do that. Your voice is unique. That has to be part of the writing process, is to let people know who you are, and that this book is unique because you wrote it. And if someone else had written it, it would be a different book.
Right. So any final thoughts from you, Michael, before we end it? We're just about the end.
I'll throw in a couple of recommendations for writing books.
Yes, I was going to ask.
And these are different. I am working my way right now through On Writing. I don't know why I haven't read that before, but I'm probably 2/3 the way through that now.
That's the Stephen King book. Yep.
The Stephen King book. One of the books that got me really excited about writing, not necessarily with any plan for what I was going to do. It's a book by Natalie Goldberg called Writing Down the Bones. And what she really preaches is writing for 5 minutes or 5 pages, and just like not censoring yourself, just write down whatever's in your head. Doesn't matter what it is. You could even be writing, I have no idea what I'm writing. I have no idea what I'm writing. This is really stupid. I hate every single minute that I'm doing this, but but keep doing that. And what that will do is it will help you get to the point where you just can trust yourself to write. And so for me, it's invaluable. It was an invaluable book.
Could you very slowly pronounce the name of the book again?
Yeah, Writing Down the Bones.
That sounded very different than the first time. So
I think there was a glitch or something in the video.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
What's your other?
The other book that I read recently, and it doesn't apply so much to the actual writing of the story or the getting the first draft out, but it's a book called The Story Grid, and it is an excellent book to help you analyze story and what makes a good story. And for me, not coming from a much of a literary background, it really talks a lot about story theory and what makes a good story, and it incorporates Joseph Campbell's hero's journey and the Kubler-Ross curve, and I mean, it just incorporates so many pieces of ways of looking at story. And I'm looking forward to using that when I finally get this out of my head and onto the paper as a way to see, okay, where's the story working, where's it not working, what needs to be tweaked. It's a lot more, for an engineer like me, it's a lot more analytical way of looking at writing. So I really recommend it.
It probably won't surprise you, Mike, to know that that book is used in a lot of writing courses, college level writing courses, because it does lay it out really well, and it kind of merges the mechanism of it with the emotion of it. So it's kind of, it works in both worlds. I have to ask, what's your favorite Vonnegut novel? You never said which one.
My favorite is probably still Player Piano.
Good choice.
Yeah.
Probably my second favorite then would be Cat's Cradle.
Yeah, he's best known for Slaughterhouse-Five, but that's not by any means, I think, his best book.
Slaughterhouse-Five was a little too disjointed for me, but then again, like I said, I'm a point A to point B person. I can't deal with ambiguity like that.
Well, this has been interesting, and I think the next time we'll probably talk about what happens when the author starts working with a publisher and/or an editor.
Yes.
And the process picks up where some authors think they should be leaving off.
Right.
And I just want to remind people that if you're going to put yourself out there, and everyone should through some form of writing, don't get caught up in criticism from an editor, a publisher, a wife named Colleen, anybody, because it's, as they said in The Godfather, it's not personal, it's business, and people genuinely want to help you improve the story that you're telling, not to make it their story, although there are some who try. But if you're open to the criticism and you can use it constructively to better your story, then the process takes as long as the process takes.
Yeah, very good.
And you'll be happier at the end.
Excellent. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Thank you both for spending time with us and giving us your expert opinions and information on this. As we said before, Mike's book is the Reluctant series. The first two are available at the Sherburne Public Library. Have to put that plug in, and they're available on their ebooks to download at this point. So I thank both of you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you,